today I'll be talking about population trend of birds in among forest reserve. I'd like to take us back in time about our history. I want to connect our history to what I actually did with the population trend. Between 1900 to 2002, this was the era where this era was the phase of development of ornithological research in Nigeria as well as in Africa. And during this period, there was actually limited funding and few trained ornithologists and enthusiasts were involved in collecting data. The focus at that time was species occurrence and distribution data, which was actually a valuable database that led to the publication of most of our field guides we use today in doing our field work. So this data was actually really rich, excellent data because it was actually the foundation for us in understanding the ecology of birds within our habitat. One of the things this data actually, the method and the approach used in collecting this data was not consistent. For instance, bird ringing. We have literature of bird ringings in the 50s, 1950s in Nigeria, but it wasn't consistent by Talan, blessed memory. He collected a lot of bird ring. He did a lot of misnetting where he captured a lot of birds and he took a lot of metrics and a lot of information from birds misnetted, but that wasn't consistent till 2000. So there was actually a breach because it was actually short term in that period. And ad hoc data from nature enthusiasts was not standardized. So it was kind of limited, but it was actually useful data. It was limited but useful data that actually gave us an headway in ornithological research in Nigeria. So why that was actually in play, why that was going on, why the focus of ornithologists of that era was to understand species ecology in terms of their occurrence and distribution. On the other hand, there were some actors acting behind the scene, which is actually the threats to species conservation, rapid human population increase, and that actually led to increase in human activities on the environment. So that actually gave that actually affected species distribution and occurrence within the environment. So as the population increased rapidly, anthropogenic activities, need for increased agricultural intensification. There was also need for increase in grazing activity. There was also need for urbanization, increased urbanization. So all this actually was acting behind the scene that actually affected species distribution as well as occurrence within the environment in the Nigerian setting. So human activity was more on the upper level compared to natural disturbances. I think one of the most common natural disturbances within Nigeria, it's more flooding, fire or tornado or drought. So this actually had, this was actually playing behind the scene why the focus between 1900 to 2000 was more on understanding the ecology, the occurrences of the distribution. So in early 2000, there was actually a transition and the commencement of long-term monitoring to investigate population trend. Why population trend? Population trend is actually useful because it helps in assessing conservation efforts. We all know that conservation funding is limited. And if funders are willing to fund conservation projects, then we should be able to assess the effort being put in place in doing the project, and it has to be sustainable. It has to be consistent so that we can actually say, the money put into this project was useful over time. Secondly, population trend is actually a pointer, helps to point species that are vulnerable to anthropogenic activities within the environment. So if we look at the trend patterns of species, we can tell species that are declining, species are increasing, and what is the cause of it. At the same time, with that, we can actually target species that are most vulnerable, conservation action plans that can actually help in saving declining population. So within a particular local trends changes with ecological conditions as a result of anthropogenic effects and natural disturbances such as succession processes and climate variables. So we set out to look at the population trend of resident bird by migratory bird species in Amurum and non-migratory bird species, that's a resident bird species within the environment, and how this trend really changes with rainfall and vegetation parameters in this location. So our study site was Amur Forest Reserve. Amur Forest Reserve is a regenerative habitat. Yeah. So prior to 2000, it was actually an open degraded habitat with high grazing activities, lots of wood harvesting going on within the environment. From 2001, it was gazetted and it was managed by the management of the institute. So this reserve is actually located in West Africa, central part of Nigeria. It's made up of 3 habitat types. You have the gallery forest, you have the rocky outcrop, and you have the savanna woodlands. Occasionally, annually we experience wild bush wildfires within the reserve, and that has led to some patches of the reserve to have grasslands, that's vegetation living. So what we did is, with the commencement of this long-term monitoring in our forest reserve, it provided us with a very good data set for us to look at population trend over 18 years period. And this constant effort site data is actually usually it's kept in the APLORI database. And when birds are trapped, we trap birds using mist nets. And after trapping birds, we ring them. And at the same time, after identification, we ring them. Usually we use rings from South Africa. And we age them and sex them if possible. After that, we take morphometric measurement like length. The method is maximum count method, and we take the weights. So other measurements, other morphometric data we collect is mode score, versus length, head length, B length, and the rest for other measurements. So all this data is actually entered and stuff. For the constant effort site in within the reserve, it has actually changed over time from 2002 to 2019. So it's kind of systematic. Right from inception, the constant effort site was actually conducted like twice to 14 days period. So there was inclusion of some biological periods over time that in 2011 it was done 5 times a year, or 5 sections in a year, on 6 days. Each section was done 6 days within in 2 sites. That's CSB and CSC. Then in 2017, they added another section. So CS was now conducted 6 times in a year, for 6 days, alternated between CSB and CSC. The reason why we alternate between sites within this during these consecutive days is to control for net avoidance, where a bird will notice nets over time if you miss net in a particular location every day and attempt to avoid the net. So in order to reduce that effect, we alternate between sites. So we took this whole data, we looked at the whole data for all the species. So species that have even spread of data over the years with with maximum of 40 data points were actually the common species that was actually selected. So in that 51 species we selected, we have 41 resident bird species and we have 10 palearctic bird species. Then for the weather data, we collected weather data from just Meteorological Center, which is not far from the institute. They had like consistent rainfall data from 2002 to 2019. For the NDVI data, we collected that from the NASA database on request. It was granted to us. And what we did, well, yeah, so in that data we collected 200, so we collected data 250 meters resolution every 16 days, where we actually looked, or where we put them together, look at the average, and we look at the mean NDVR, and the same for rainfall. So yeah, before we go to the point of an, so during the, before the analysis, we actually, during our data wrangling or data cleaning stage where we have to explore our data, we had to standardize the first year to 0, which is more like the reference point for every other year. We actually, every other year we tracked. Okay? For objective 1, where we had to look at population trend over the years, we had data, species count, which is a response variable. We have here plus ringing effort. We have to include ringing effort because we have to control for the change in ringing effort over the years. And the family classical zone, this was just to control for dispersion. Our data was actually integer data, so Poisson was actually variable. So there was actually a mild dispersion, which we have to control for. So we opted how to use the family classical. So for objective 2, we have the population trend species, how it actually leads to environmental parameters. We have species count on the Y variable. As our Y variable, we have mean NDVI, mean rainfall. Ringing effort comes in to control for variation over the years. So what did we find out? We found out that most bird species actually have positive population trends with few downward trends. So 12 resident bird species, that's 29% of them, should decline should decline in the population trend, while 10, which is one species, the common white throat, was only native migrants that had a downward trend. So so most of the resident bird species that actually showed downward trend were actually granivorous bird species like bronze manikin, red-cheeked cottonbill, lavender waxbill, red-bill firefinch. These were all granivorous species that are associated with open grassland, which decrease as anthropogenic influence within the reserve improved over time. So species tends likely to reflect changes in their local conditions or reduce their their food resources, simply put, their resources within time. So as the reserve over time so there was a shift in vegetation pattern in the reserve from open degraded savanna to more wooded and forest habitats. So there was, for this species, it wasn't suitable for them. So they have to utilize other habitats. That doesn't mean within APLORI, which is more like when you're considering the local density of this species, is actually reducing within the reserve. But outside the reserve, you see a lot of those granivorous bird species within open habitats. Now, we looked at mean NDVI over the years, and we also looked at rainfall. Mean NDVI was really, really good, which indicates that primary productivity within our study site has actually improved over the years. Rainfall patterns seems to remain the same, despite the fact that after the Great Flood in 1980s, there was an increase in Africa generally. But within the study sites, the mean rainfall pattern within an annual basis seems to be stable over the years. Species trend were actually enhanced by vegetation variety. Only 3 resident bird species actually showed a negative decline with rainfall. That's the mustache grass warbler, the tiny flank perennial, singing cisticolas. No. So because increase in end so there was actually a positive relationship, increased NDVI over the years, which actually has actually helped species to have either a positive increase or a stable trend NDVI. So some species had like a direct correlation for an NDVI, while other species were sensitive to rainfall, not NDVI. Yeah, because one thing we should note is the increase in NDVI. None of our species, no species trend actually had a negative relationship with NDVI, which tells us that increased NDVI within the environment reflects primary productivity, but why it decreases habitat suitability. That was the case for the granivorous bird species. There was actually increase in vegetation pattern within the reserve, but this actually changed the habitat for them, and it decreased habitat suitability for the granivorous bird species within the reserve. So one of the other things we did was to compare population trend pattern in a forest reserve with global, that of Palearctic species. It was only common white-throats that actually matched, that actually showed decline population trend with that of the global population trend of common white-throat. Whereas every other migrant bird species was not a good match. Okay, was not similar, or the trend pattern was not similar to that of the global population trend. So which tells us that Amuru still remains a very good site for migrant bird species to utilize during their wintering and stopover periods at the reserve. Yeah, but change in habitat structure and vegetation structure over time might make it not suitable for some migrant species. Work done by Claudia Tapper after the publication of this work, as she said, as long as shrubs are actually available within habitat, definitely see the common white-throat in that habitat, no matter how degraded, whether it's an abandoned mining site with shrubs. As long as shrubs are available and resources are available for the white-throat, you definitely see them. So outside the reserve, you see lots of common white-throat, but within the reserve, just because of the change in habitat structure a bit, so moving from open savanna to a more forested habitat actually changed it. They actually changed the population, led to the reduction of white-throats within the reserve. Yeah, so just a bit of the graph that has to do with this thing. So for Winchat had a positive relationship with mean NDVI since none of our farmland migrant bird species, resident bird species, actually had any negative relation with NDVI, which actually suggests that habitat change is not really a strong factor affecting population trends of bird within the local sites. Yeah, on a global scale, when you look at it on a global scale, it might be, but on local scale, it's not. So I'd like to say that species population stability or increase was due to improved habitats, vegetation, less anthropogenic activity, because what we actually surveyed a good site and a site that is managed, so that's actually changed from integrated to forest habitats in 2019. So there's a lot of change in vegetation, and there's also a reduction in anthropogenic activity as it's being managed. And there are some penalties. People come over to graze or harvest wood excessively within the reserve. So that management effort put in place actually helped at the same time the improved vegetation of species within this environment increase or still environmental. So we're also contributing factors because we have for NDVI it was a positive trend. Rainfall was actually stable over time. Habitat change. We all talk about conservation. We should conserve an environment, but sometimes habitat change within a particular environment actually lead to decrease in habitat suitability for some species because some species have specific preference for a particular species where they can actually survive effectively. So habitat change can result of different species population responses. Forest reserve actually has its own challenge because we actually experience wildfires annually at different intensity, and you see in part of within reserve patches of the reserve. Yeah, so this positive effect on some species. Yeah, and I also have negative species. So yeah, it was a good paper out there, but it has some limitation because this work was just within just a small area. Compare the size of Nigeria. This is just within a particular area, just very small area compared to the size of Nigeria. So that was one of the limitations. The reason is because we only Forest Reserve had the longest data set, CS data set you can actually use to really look at the state of avian biodiversity, that the population trend over time within Nigeria. And for CS, the misnetting, we only considered common species. So rare species are not considered because you get rare species from time to time. They don't really frequently go into the nets for you to trap them. So just only common species we considered over time. Then we need more fieldwork. We still have limited to carry out such long-term monitoring scheme within the country. So we need more field study that can actually tell us more about the state of bird in Nigeria, so West Africa. So this work, conservation part of this work is we just use Forest Reserve as a case study of how effective management of a protected site that was degraded to a more forested site combined with long data sets can be used to inform conservation. So it's still Forest Reserve still remain a very small place. There are 300 acres. It remains one of the best school sites within Jos, that is a refuge for resident bird species as well as hotspot for migratory bird species. During their
Donc, résumer très rapidement la présentation de Joy. Donc, elle travaille à l'Institut APLORI dans d'études ornithologiques au Nigeria. Et donc, aujourd'hui, elle nous a présenté un travail de suivi sur le long terme, donc sur plusieurs années, qui s'est étendu de 2002 jusqu'à 2019, où donc cette équipe a capturé et bagué des oiseaux résidents et migrateurs dans une zone d'études données. Et donc, cette zone, c'était la réserve forestière d'Amorum, si je prononce bien. Et donc, durant le bagage, ils ont aussi récupéré des données biométriques sur les oiseaux. Et donc, en plus de ces données-là, ils ont combiné donc, avec des données environnementales, notamment les données concernant les précipitations au fil des ans, et aussi des autres données concernant la végétation, donc l'indice de végétation par différence normalisée, NDVI. Et donc ensuite, ils ont, avec ces données-là, calculé un petit peu les différentes tendances des populations d'oiseaux au fur et à mesure des années. Donc savoir si les populations étaient stables, augmentaient ou diminuaient en fonction des variables environnementales. Et, euh, et donc, ce qu'ils se sont notamment rendus compte, c'est que donc ces paramètres de précipitation et d'indice de végétation peuvent avoir un impact positif sur certaines populations d'oiseaux. Donc en revanche, ils se sont aperçus donc pour certaines communautés d'oiseaux, lorsqu'il y avait un changement progressif de l'habitat, mettons par exemple, ah oui, j'ai oublié de signaler, donc dans cette zone d'étude, on a trois différents types d'habitats. Il y a des zones forestières, des zones plutôt de savane arborée et des zones cultivées. Et donc par exemple, si on a un basculement progressif entre de la savane arborée vers une zone forestière plus fermée, bah forcément, il y a des communautés d'oiseaux qui vont progressivement abandonner un petit peu cet espace-là, puisque ce ne sont pas des espèces qui se spécialisent sur les zones forestières, mais plutôt sur des milieux ouverts. Donc, s'il y a un changement d'habitat, on va observer un changement des communautés d'oiseaux. Et donc, sinon, les principales donc, limites au niveau de l'étude, c'était donc elle a fait remarquer que la zone était assez petite et donc ça serait intéressant d'élargir un petit peu la zone d'étude. Aussi, les espèces rares n'avaient pas été prises en compte. Et globalement, donc c'est une étude sur le long terme, donc ce sont des données précieuses. Et il serait nécessaire de continuer à engranger des données au fur et à mesure des années. Et puis voilà. Merci à vous.
Merci.